Mr. Williams.
So good afternoon, everyone. Moments ago, the governor announced the latest set of county placements under the state's new 4-tier framework under the state health order for reopening and response to COVID-19. As many of you know, under that state framework, there are 4 color tiers that represent different levels of spread and accordingly have different restrictions placed under the state order. Our county, when this new framework was first announced last week, was placed along with most counties in California in the purple tier, or tier 1, which is the most restrictive tier under the state framework. Our county today, it was announced, has been moved by the state into the red tier, which is the second most restrictive tier under the state framework. Under the red tier, a number of sectors can open under the state order. But it is really important and critical, as has always been the case from the beginning of the pandemic and its response, for everyone to recognize and remember that the stricter of the state order or the local order is controlling. And as has been the case since early July, the county also has its risk reduction order in place, and all of the provisions of that risk reduction order remain in effect. And so I'll talk in just a moment about what that means as applied to the state's red tier framework. But before I do that, I'm going to take a second to talk about how the tier placements work. This new framework that the state put out assigns counties into one of the 4 tiers based on 2 factors. The first factor has to do with case rate, the number of adjusted cases per 100,000 population. And there's an adjustment in that case rate factor based on the volume of testing. And Dr. Fenstersheim is going to speak to that in a few moments. But it is on the basis of that adjustment that we're placed into the red tier today. The second factor is the positivity rate for our cases. And the county is placed into a tier based on the stricter of those 2 factors. And based on that analysis, the state has placed us in the red tier. Under the state's framework for the red tier, there are a number of sectors that can now open and also allowed under a local county risk reduction order. Those include personal care services like nail salons and massages can now resume operation indoors as long as they follow the baseline requirements under the risk reduction order. Gyms and fitness centers under the state order can resume indoor operation at 10% capacity. Shopping malls can increase their capacity from 25% at the purple tier up to 50%. Indoor museums, zoos, aquariums can reopen at 25% capacity. And most significant of all, if the county remains in the red tier for 14 days, K-12 schools may reopen. And the county has done a lot of work in preparation for potential school opening, including putting out guidance several months ago and continuing to work with schools, as well as the continued processing of waiver applications, which even in the interim through this 14-day period will continue to be reviewed and processed by public health. There are, however, 3 areas under the state's red tier that may not open under the county risk reduction order. That is indoor dining, indoor gatherings, and indoor movie theaters. As you may recall, when the county put the risk reduction order in place in early July, it was based on some core uniform principles. And one of those important principles was that outdoors is safer than indoors. A second principle was that there should be strict face covering when indoors. And a third key principle had to do with maintaining social distancing and ensuring that we're avoiding super spreader type of events and forums. Those core principles are what have the effect of, under the risk reduction order, keeping, for example, indoor dining, which would inherently require removing a face covering, closed. It's those same core principles that apply to the prohibition on indoor gatherings and indoor movie theaters. And especially in the context of the significant volume of activity that opening of schools may bring, it's all the more important that we remain really vigilant and on top of trying to keep the case counts here locally as low as possible. And again, we only moved into the red tier because of how much testing we do above the state average. So once again, the risk reduction order remains in effect. Those requirements remain in effect. Every business still needs to have its social distancing protocol, and we've got that database now publicly available. The density rules remain in effect. All of the basic principles, face covering and social distancing and hand sanitation, remain just as critical as before. And if we continue to stay focused on those core principles, we'll continue to be able to be as successful as we have been. And this movement into the red tier is a reflection of the fact that here in our county, we are doing a bit better relative to many other parts of the state in combating COVID. And it's really extraordinary how we've continue to come together as a community to be really rigorous, thoughtful, and uniform in our application of these absolutely vital principles around preventing COVID transmission.